Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Rational Standard. It's another week, another episode. This has been an eventful week, I would say, and I think next week is potentially going to be even more eventful with the G20 kicking off, I believe, next week, Thursday or Friday. And already it's dominating the discourse in an indirect way, but next week is sure to be an interesting one. But this week has also been interesting. We had two important speeches, I guess, or two important publications by the government. The first one was on Tuesday, was the QLFS, the quarterly labor force survey, and that was followed the next day by the mini budget by the finance minister. We're not going to get into the mini budget. Often it's kind of just an update on what the main budget from February kind of has resulted in. So the big conversation again is coming next February. But we are going to spend a little bit of time on unemployment because the Free Market Foundation, as part of its Liberty First project, its Liberty First proposals for policy reform in South Africa, published its JSEC paper, its Job Seekers Exemption Certificate proposal, which was the idea was generated by FMF President Eustace Davey many years ago in the 2000s, and effectively we updated the JSEC concept and published it as part of the Liberty First proposals. That paper was by FMF policy officer Zakele Mtembu Zakes, one of our regular podcast participants. He can't be here today, but we launched that on Tuesday. And effectively, what the JSEC is, kind of what the name implies, is that a unemployed person who has been unemployed for 6 months applies, not really applies, but kind of goes to a municipality, says that they have been unemployed for 6 months, signs an affidavit to that effect, and then they get the JSEC, a certificate that exempts them, the unemployed individual, from all South Africa's stringent labor laws, and allows them to freely contract with employers, and kind of do work based on terms that they as an individual are willing to accept, rather than what the state dictates through minimum wages, through sectoral bargaining, extensions of sectoral bargaining agreements, kind of equity race things. So a JSEC would empower the unemployed to exempt themselves on an individual basis. And that would be valid for 2 years to allow them to get experience, to get entrenched in the labor market, at which point the JSEC would fall away and all the usual very unfortunate labor regulations would kick back into gear. So that's kind of the idea, to solve what we are calling, and what many have called over many years, a ticking time bomb of unemployment in South Africa, because this is really a crisis. And the QLFS showed that unemployment hasn't been solved. It decreased very slightly, I think, by a few 100,000 jobs. I mean, these are kind of decimal points that kind of statisticians kind of come up with in back offices, and now we have to believe that kind of there is 250,000 additionally employed people. So we're not terribly convinced by that, specifically, I guess, because there has been no real reform that has made it easier to hire people, that has made mass employment more attractive in an economic and in a commercial sense. So the unemployment crisis is far from being solved, but JSEC, in our view at the Free Market Foundation, does represent a tangible solution that can be implemented without undoing all of these various labor laws that the government and its union alliance partners are so desperate to protect. JSEC is a temporary fix that has the potential to fix the unemployment crisis. So yeah, we're gonna chat a little bit about that, and then towards the end of the show, we'll get into the other thing, the other big thing that's been happening in South Africa this week. Can you guess it? Yes, race law, billboards back on the agenda, but more on that a bit later. Nicholas, let's start with you. Thanks to you and Ayanda for joining us. What's your take on the QLFS unemployment and kind of the need for solving this issue, kind of with some level of haste?
Thanks for having me. I think we can all agree that the fundamental problem and problems in this country is the two topics of this video, episode, which is unemployment and race law. I think that if we sorted out our unemployment, we'd be able to sort out, getting money into people's pockets so they could buy food for nutrition for their kids. They'd be able to afford education, which would be able to uplift them. There would be much less incentive for crime. It's not going to rid it completely. I don't believe that poverty is the sole source of crime, but it would definitely eliminate a huge proportion of opportunistic crime, and it would also keep people busy. And that's one of the big things that will stop gangsterism, which is our main source of violence in this country. I think that unemployment is the thing that should be the priority. It's ludicrous, I find, that political parties waste time with anything other than that. I also think that the false optimism arriving from this new updated, diminished unemployment rate, it is fake. It's based on a very limited definition. It's based on people who we're looking basically only people who are looking for a job but can't find one, and excludes the people who have given up. It is a very narrow definition, and we've seen plenty of things which say that especially our youth unemployment rate is far closer to 40, even 45%, and that's the thing we should be worried about, because it's the youth that need jobs, the youth that need their foot in the door. It's the youth that would need a job seeker certificate, or even better, to just get rid of all these stringent regulations altogether. But if the government's not keen on a job seeker exemption certificate, they're definitely not keen on eliminating all these regulations. But I think you probably find that if we sorted out our labor laws, if we allowed the unemployed to actually get a job, to get their foot in the door, we would sort out most of South Africa's problems. It would be, we'd also sort out our fiscus, because we'd have much more taxpayers. But that is a segue which I think possibly worth going down briefly before I move on to Ayanda, is that we have all these proposals on raising taxes, raising VAT, all these things, taxing the rich, wealth taxes, all these things. That's silly. People don't realize that we don't need higher tax rates. That's unsustainable. We're far past the Laffer curve. It would just mean more people diminishing wealth and lowering our GDP, lowering the amount of value that's actually being produced in the economy. What we need is more taxpayers. And we accomplish that by allowing more people to get jobs and allowing more people to feed their families, to grow businesses, to invest. That's and at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. Thank you.
Absolutely. And just a second before I go to Ayanda, I'm aware that people are saying we are being shown as if we're on a cell phone screen on YouTube. I don't know why that is. On the back end, we're showing kind of as usual. I think StreamYard has updated a new feature, and I see that there is an option to be kind of on this the cell phone screen thing, but yeah, on our side it shows normally kind of on the back end. So we'll try to figure that out. But in the meantime, I hope all the audio and video is coming through clearly anyway. Ayanda, your take on JSEC, and do you think it's a kind of a viable solution to unemployment?
Yeah, thanks very much, Martin, for giving me an opportunity to speak about this very important issue. I think Nicholas has already raised a very important point in that regard. Before you even go into JSEC and its merits, I think what you want to sort of look at here is the impact of this joblessness, of this time bomb that we have in the country. Because when you have this massive reservoir of young people who are unemployed, who have no access to the economy, who are formally excluded, they become available, as David Onsoro noted in his Common Sense article this past week, they become available for all kinds of mobilization by politicians, whether on the left or on the right, looking at the rise of populism in South Africa, where people take this anger of young people and then they direct it towards particular scapegoats. It's not white people, it's the immigrants. It's not the immigrants, it's white people. So this is a very dangerous thing in the sense that it is a time bomb. It can lead to unrest in society, can lead to violence, it can lead to xenophobic violence, as we have seen before, really, in the history of this country. So that is why it is so important to address the issue of unemployment. It's the potential impact that it could have on the country. But moving on to JSEC and its merits and what really is its essence, because the point that ZEX is making is a very important one, and it is that human beings are rational actors, who naturally pursue their own self-interest if they are allowed to do so, right? And this idea that you can have a state that tries to, infantilize people and tell them that we think that this is the wage that you should work for as a person really is an offensive idea. I think it's insulting to people, and it doesn't take into account that it is people themselves who are aware of their situation, who are aware of their struggles, who are aware of their challenges, and who are best placed to make decisions that they believe are in their best interests. I think it is very wrong and it is immoral, and it attacks the freedom of people to try and determine as to how much they really should earn. If a young person who has been unemployed for years, who has a degree, believes that they should get a job, they want to have skin in the game, then they should be allowed to do that. I don't think you should have an approach that says it is the state, and even then arbitrarily, that determines that this is an acceptable wage or this is how much someone should actually earn. And on that note, because people like referencing China as some successful model of socialism, what most people miss about the Chinese model, and I spoke to this about ZEX the other day in the office, is the Chinese model relied very heavily on what you can call low-cost labor to industrialize the country. There was an understanding that if you want to really take over the world and become the next factory of the world or this huge industrial hub, you have to leverage this massive population that we have in China. And in our case, we have this massive population. You have to leverage this massive population that you have. And in the process, even if they are earning low wages, but in the process, they are acquiring very, very important skills that they can use at a later point. As you saw in China, with the industries popping up all over. Once people had acquired all these skills that they got, they were then able to go themselves and establish their own enterprises, their own factories, their own industries, which is why China today is producing virtually everything that we use, from clothing to electrical appliances. So really the point that one is making here is that there are no easy solutions. There are trade-offs, unfortunately. And in our case, we're not prepared to make those trade-offs. We want to make that leap from being where we are now to being this first world country where everyone is earning all these high wages and everything. And it doesn't work like that, unfortunately, in reality. You have to make these trade-offs. Young people will, for this period, have to be in these positions where they will earn low wages, but in the long run, it gives them skin in the game. They gain valuable skills. They also gain experience that they can use further on. And the good thing about being in the labor market is that once you're in the labor market, it's very easy for you to find employment again. You don't have a situation where you will work and then again you're out of the labor market for years. You have skin in the game, and it's easier for you to access more opportunities. To my last point surrounding this thing, and it also feeds into the kind of populism that you're seeing in South Africa. What you're seeing again is young people being on the margins of society, being excluded from the economy. They aren't participating On the other hand, they are seeing this immigrant population that appears to be progressing. They're running their own businesses, they're working, creating employment for each other, because this is something which isn't popular to say. But most immigrants in this country are self-employed, so they create jobs for each other in the informal economy. And so as young people see this, there's this anger that begins to bubble in them. But the politicians who mobilize them don't tell them what the real reasons are for their unemployment. What they do is to mobilize them against the same foreigners and say, these people are taking your jobs, they're responsible for it. And it's like, no, they aren't taking your jobs. As Checkers 6060 said the other day, and ShopRite, most of the people who are driving these scooters you see delivering food are migrants, because the locals aren't applying for these jobs. Most of the people who are applying to drive these scooters are actually migrants themselves. But the populists don't mention these things. They don't speak about the regulations which Zex covers in his paper, the labor laws. They simplify the issue and they say these people are taking your jobs. So the point again here is that the reason why they are able to thrive and prosper in South Africa is that many of them are often willing to work for wages that are far lower than South Africans themselves are willing to work for. And that leads to a situation where they are overrepresented, for example, in e-hailing, in things like delivery, and even in some sectors of the economy, services sector, they're working in restaurants and all these other places. So there's also a need for us to realize that the kind of populism that we're seeing now simplifies the issue. It doesn't address the issue. At the heart of the issue is this regulation we're dealing with. It is these labor laws that are making it difficult for young people to actually enter the economy and participate meaningfully. They are blocking them from participating meaningfully. And what you want at the end of the day is to give young people freedom. It's to trust young people to make choices that are going to benefit them in the long run. It's to allow them to obtain these JSEC certificates and to exempt themselves from labor laws in this country, to do exactly what Nigerians, for instance, the Igbo people in this country are doing, where they have an apprenticeship system for their children, where if you are a business owner, you allow your child to come and work in your business, they gain skills, they gain experience, until a time when you can give them enough capital to go and establish their own businesses. There are no easy fixes to this problem, and we're going to have to make serious policy trade-offs. And I think JSEC is a very, very important trade-off that we must be willing to make. It's a very important intervention that is going to allow millions of young people immediately to be able to participate in the labor force. And you're going to be surprised that all this capital that is supposedly locked in, which is why others believe the state needs to then invest itself, all this capital that is locked in is going to be freed up. It's going to be invested. People will be able to sort of really get a step into the economy and participate meaningfully.
Absolutely. You make two very important points. The first one there, Ayanda, is about value subjectivity. Now, people want to moralize all the time, and this is one of the kind of issues with activism, with kind of public intellectuals that come and academize real issues, like bread and butter issues. Like, we have people who don't have employment, they need to work, they need to eat, but then somewhere from the clouds, the academic floats in and he says that, what you're willing to work for, it's not ideal. So actually, you must go and stay poor and potentially even starve to death, because that's somehow better than kind of working for. I mean, this is the idea of half a loaf of bread is better than no loaf. And the moment you say that, the activists come out and say, how dare you say that, you're diminishing these people. And it's always the same story. It's like you mentioned race. Like you would see these leftist kind of radicals on Twitter, and they'll be like, you white people, you just want cheap labor from the continent. That's all you want. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, yes, you're right. Yeah, that's how it works. If I want to go and buy a product, I am going to take into account what it costs. And so are you. Like, this is how it works. You are always going to take into account what something costs. And you can moralize, you can say, the national minimum wage, what's it now, 2,500 something a month. That's nothing. It's a pittance. How dare you say that that is too expensive? Listen, I'm sorry, but this is the reality. This is the economic reality that is borne out. Like, we cannot moralize from the ivory tower and shake our fist at the market. The market does not care about the shaking fist. The market will show you flames. Like, you can regulate the economy into complete submission. It will not care. You're not hurting the market. The market does not care. It will just drive you into a depression, and you will have a humanitarian disaster on your hands. The market is going to show you flames if you try to moralize everything. That is why you have to respect value subjectivity. What is value subjectivity? Each individual assigns specific values that are entirely personal to them. It is entirely personal to each individual on the planet what something is worth to them. And if you get into a business, a guy who, at the launch of the JSEC, I made the example of a spaza shop owner. This guy owns a spaza shop in the township. He is frustrated by having to sweep the floor every week. He wants to focus on expanding his business, but it's not that important to him. He will sweep the floor. He's happy to sweep the floor. It's just frustrating. But so he's willing to pay someone, say, 1,000 rand to come and sweep the floor for him. If it goes above that, then it's no longer worth it to him. Then he's going to keep sweeping the floor himself. No water off his back. And now the government says you are not allowed. You will go to prison if you employ someone at 1,000 rand a month to sweep your floor. What is he going to do? Well, either he's not going to employ anyone, so that's a job lost to the market. He's going to sweep the floor himself. That's one option. The other option, which links with your second topic, Ayanda, is he is going to look around. He's going to be like, to who does our labor law not apply? The illegal immigrants, because they're not here. They actually don't exist in South Africa. They are effectively a ghost person. So come on, 1,000 rand a month. Cool, labor law doesn't apply to you. That's why you have illegal immigrants who are employed as cheap labor. That is why. It's not because of we love Zambians so much and we love the Congolese so much that we just want to employ them. No. It's because they're not protected into poverty by South Africa's ridiculous labor laws. That is how value subjectivity works. It applies everywhere. It is not a white thing. It's not a capitalist thing. The Soviets did it. The Chinese do it. This is just normal. This is how life works, and we can be upset about it. We can say that it's not a living wage. We can say that it's not a dignified living. That is academizing some real issues. South Africa cannot leapfrog. We cannot leapfrog our development. We actually have to develop. We cannot say that we deem ourselves now to be a developed state because that's what the law now says. We will pay everyone a living wage. No, it does not work that way. It doesn't work that way anywhere. We need to climb those stairs one at a time. And it's not a long time, actually. The post-Soviet states all went out of kind of abject poverty to basically first world status within basically a generation. We're now almost 2 generations out of apartheid. Like, we could have done this. We could have had people earning living wages today, right now in South Africa, if we just respected how life works, how the economy works, how the market works, rather than trying to substitute all of that with our idealistic notions of what is the kind of the good life and how should people live, kind of how do our textbooks say people should live, and then trying to legislate that is the problem. So yeah, and I mean the point you make about immigration is completely correct. This is not an issue that's going to be solved through policy. We have to actually have less policy if we want to solve this problem. Immigrants are, and this is the case all around the world, it's not just in South Africa, immigrants are willing to work for less. They're willing to work harder because they are now in unknown waters. They have to prove themselves. They have to establish themselves. Otherwise, they can get sent back. They have to entrench themselves in their new society. So they have a real built-in incentive as immigrants. And now we can blame them for having the incentive. But this is, again, this is just how it works. It's no secret why Jews, for instance, wherever they go around the world, they do well. It's because they have an incentive, specifically as Jews, as one can almost say an inherently foreign population. Wherever they go, they are always motivated to try and outshine the natives. And that's the case with all immigrants. So we can really rage against reality all we want, but rather let's try respecting it and seeing what happens. I think will actually go quite well, and the JSEC I think is the first step to that. Nicholas, I'll give you the last word on unemployment, and then we're gonna go over to our next topic.
I think Ayanda has a brief point just before my closing remarks.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Ayanda.
Yeah, my brief point before I hand over to Nicholas is a simple one, and that is, and you actually touched on this, Martin, just now, that lower labor costs in business lead to lower operational costs, and that results in cheaper prices. That's basic economics. I mean, it's not complicated. So the same South Africans who are complaining about exploitation and saying we need labor laws don't realize that the same spaza shops they buy from have cheap prices because of that. They're not paying the price that you would pay at another place because of precisely the lower labor costs that lead to lower operational costs. The moment you bring South Africans into there, and I'm not saying I'm against South Africans, the moment they start working for you, what do they do the next week? They bring unions to come and protest outside the workplace and protest for higher wages. What does that lead to? It leads to higher labor costs. What do business owners do? They pass on those costs to consumers, and then you have higher prices in shops. Again, this is basic economics. But populists are not going to tell people this. They're going to lie to them and say, no, the big problem we have here in South Africa are big conglomerates that want to exploit people. But even then, when we speak about businesses and exploitation, these labor laws have had a catastrophic impact on small and medium enterprises, which should be the engines of job creation in this country. The bigger businesses like ShopRite or Checkers, even though we hate labor laws, they can handle those costs. It's the smaller businesses in townships in the informal economy that cannot handle those costs. And that is why they have been crippled. Because if you're a small business owner in the township and you're saying, this is how much money I make in a month, I can only afford to pay you this amount of money as my worker, the state says, no, you're exploiting someone. And that is why we have a big problem with small and medium enterprises being crippled in this country. It's regulation.
I think there's an excellent point on there that if you want to end inflation, if you want everything to be cheaper, which means that people won't need to earn as much, you lower labor costs. And that would also add that it would make us a more competitive destination for tourists, which adds even more value, even more jobs. It all sorts each other out. And there's a problem with the unions where they always have this thing where like, oh no, we have to have our 20 billion% annual pay raise across the board, regardless of extra work. And then, all the costs rise. And then they're like, oh, well, now we don't have a raise. It's evil. The capitalism is destroying us. Before we move on to the next topic, some points I want to just address and add on to you guys' points from earlier. Talk about the Chinese model and how South Africa is obsessed with all the wrong things from China. They've also talked about the developmental states. I know a lot of socialists like to talk about the South Asian tigers and the developmental states and how they used state intervention. And I studied like Japan, South Korea, and Singapore, and these Asian tigers. Their interventions were not socialist interventions. They had borderline no labor regulations. They did not care about the safety of workers. They did not care about the happiness of workers, to a point where maybe even I, as a hardcore capitalist, would be like, maybe you're going a little bit too rough there. But literally, like Singapore and Japan, South Korea actively banned communism. They actively banned unions. They did not allow negotiations. They were extremely pro-employer. And I'm not saying that we need to go that thing. What I think we're saying is it needs to be an equal playing field. There needs to be that it should be between an employee and an employer. No one else should be getting involved. But they shouldn't be talking about the developmental state when the interventions that would be needed is protecting employers from workers. And I wanted to throw a little bit of a span in the works as well, to say that regulations and policy are definitely the root cause of unemployment. But I also want to talk a little bit about the culture of a lot of the unemployed in this country. Now, I know a lot of people who are entering the workplace. They've studied, and also a lot of people from when I graduated. And I think that the schooling system, and this is probably a worldwide thing, doesn't prepare people for rejection, for temporary rejection, temporary failure. I think the thing about school is kind of like, okay, if you fail, you fail. Your life is screwed at that point. There's no point going on. But that's not how life works. Life is, you don't need to succeed every single time. You only need to succeed once. And this is what I think a lot of people don't understand, is that it doesn't matter if you're rejected from your job. It doesn't matter if people keep ignoring your job applications. What matters is that it doesn't matter if you fail 49 times. You only need to succeed once. And that's something I think a lot of people don't understand, is you have to keep pushing, and that there has to be like grit. And I think that a lot of South Africans particularly just lack that grit to keep pushing, keep asking, keep looking. Because if we deregulated, there would have to be fewer rejections, because it'd be more likely someone would take a chance on them. But at the same time, there's a job out there. And as you said, Ayanda, once you've got that job experience, your foot's already in the door, you've got skin in the game, the people will act. It's a lot easier to get a job after that point. I also wanted to end with the last thing, which was a comment on, I think a lot of people misunderstand why South Africans employers hire foreigners. I think we know, as people understand economics, that the real reason is that they're actually employable because they're not held back by terrible regulations and held back by overly inflated costs that just don't, as you said, the sweeping thing is a perfect idea, because I would love to hire someone to clean my house, but there's so much schlep involved, there's so much risk involved, that I end up just doing it myself and wasting time which I could be working. But the joke we want to say is that, especially that I get a lot of these little posts that they put through my post box and you hand out at the robots, where they'll say things like, I'm an experienced Malawian woman. I think, okay, you must have been a Malawian all your life. You're very experienced. But I think that, I found a lot of these people who are claiming to be foreign, they claim to be from Zimbabwe, Malawian, I hear their accents. I understand that they're not speaking Malawian, or they're not speaking... they're speaking Xhosa. They're speaking Zulu. I know I might not understand language, but I can understand what it sounds like. I recognize words. And I think a lot of local South Africans think that people prefer hiring foreigners because they're foreign. They don't understand that, no, there's a different reason involved there. And that's why I think a lot of the resentment comes from. They think, oh, no, we're not good enough because people don't like us. No, it's not that. It's policy. It's all that. It's my 50 cents.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I didn't know that people were doing that, and yeah, I think that speaks directly to what Ayanda has been saying about how people are lied to by populists, because that message never comes through. It's not that there's a real and sensible and rational economic reason why foreigners are preferred, specifically illegal foreigners, I should add, because legal foreigners are subject to the same disastrous labor laws. But yeah, people are starting to see that, no, it's only the foreigners who are employed. There's something biologically wrong with me. So yeah, that's the problem, and kind of building the segue to the next topic. This is not just something we see in South Africa. I watched a video by Ben Shapiro yesterday, and I can highly recommend it. It's one of his shorter clips where I think it's titled my words are being used against me or misrepresented or something. And the part that I'm referring to is where Donald Trump actually said something sensible about immigration. Trump was being interviewed on some Fox News channel, because he's not taking down the H1B1 visa like a lot of America First people want him to. And he basically, Donald Trump, like unscripted, he actually says, listen, we need the experience from around the world. We want the best and brightest from South Korea, from India to come here and work in our tech sector. Like, these people bring a lot of experience to the US. Trump was saying this. And I'm assuming a very supportive interviewer was taking a big issue with him saying that. And a lot of MAGA people in the US have I mean, really responded negatively to Donald Trump saying that. Someone like Brett Cooper, who was of Daily Wire, I think Matt Walsh, they're saying, "Ah, no, rah rah, America first." But Ben Shapiro said, "Listen, you guys are all idiots. Like, this is basic economics. This is basic economics." Ben Shapiro is anti-immigration, I would say, generally, but even he understands basic economics, and therefore he comes at this from a completely sober perspective, saying that we're going to need foreigners in this country for purely economic reasons. And also, it's a good thing for America strategically to attract all the best and brightest from around the world and deprive those potential enemies of the US, like China specifically, deprive them of their best and brightest. So Ben, really, I can really recommend him. He's probably one of my favorite conservatives. But it just shows that even amongst people, I would say that we consider more or less on our side. There's a large degree of populism taking foot around the world, and it's specifically kind of characterized by a complete and utter refusal to just try to understand economics. It's almost brazen. I can't bring myself to watch a lot of their content now because it's so cringeworthy that they, like our domestic leftists, try to moralize these issues about, oh, we need Americans to be employed, and there's like this moral imperative involved here. And it's like, no, listen, you're moralizing the market. The market does not care. The market is not impressed. You're going to see flames if you keep this up for long enough. So on that foreign topic, next week, South Africa is receiving a lot of countries from around the world. The US is not one of them. The US is out. Javier Milei from Argentina is out. I read that China is out. I couldn't quite believe that, but I think at least the premier isn't coming. Nicholas,
Yeah.
you know if
It,
they're yeah?
it's a half snub. Their premier's not coming, even though he came last time. And so some people are trying to argue, saying it's not a full snub because he doesn't really care about G20 anymore. But we're
Right.
supposed to be their allies, so maybe they should be coming. But it's a snub.
Yeah. So I think that Ramaphosa is probably not enjoying what's happening. I think the American snub was significant. The South Africans reacted with, I mean, they're trying to act like they're playing it off cool. Like some journalist, Peter Bruce, is writing, well, at some point, America is going to call South Africa and they will wonder why no one's answering in Pretoria. It's like, yeah, delusions of grandeur. But so that's happening. And Solidarity Movement, which published a documentary earlier this week, Race to the Bottom, which Ayanda and I both appear in. We're quite honored for that opportunity. It's about race law and South Africa's racial kind of dispensation, and kind of in part of that campaign to make the G20 countries, the delegates who are coming to South Africa, aware of what is happening in South Africa, how we are, I would say, if not the most race-regulated country in the world, we are certainly one of the most race-regulated countries in the world. Solidarity put up a big banner in Johannesburg, kind of next to the highway, and now they've put up various smaller banners as well around this the city where the G20 is meeting. But Panyaza Lesufi, so Solidarity had an agreement with a private advertising company. It was all kind of above board, legally done. Then Panyaza Lesufi obviously had an issue with that, and he instructed the metro government and the metro police to come and take down the banner illegally. Like they're doing it illegally. So they took down that big banner, and he tweeted about it. Lesufi, very proud, saying, and it's gone. And like a lot of people were like, no, but Lesufi, you've been defending race laws. What's the problem? You like this stuff. Why are you trying to hide it now? But kind of that's an aside. And now Solidarity this morning, I saw that they're going to court. They're taking Lesufi, the company that they contracted with, the Johannesburg Metro and the Metro Police Department, taking them to court. Kind of it's a textbook case of an unlawful kind of interference in a contract, I would say. I mean, if either one of the three of us went and we just started taking down kind of advertising around the city, we'll be arrested and we'll go to prison if we did that. So it's very illegal to do that, even if you have the premier title in front of your name. So we're going to see where that goes. So that brings the race law aspect into it. But what I was more interested in, and we can kind of get into all of this, but what stood out to me again, and this is something we have spoken about before, is that there is a problem with this idea of kind of public property that the state holds in custodianship for all of us. And I'm speaking specifically to South African conservatives now. I know the left loves their public property, and you're not going to convince them. But you guys, conservatives, you still don't get it. And I say this with all due respect. Like a few months ago, it was announced that Johannesburg was considering privatizing a bunch of its public parks, and the biggest pushback against that came from conservative people around the country, kind of people that are basically on our side of the argument all of the time, except for this. A kind of knee-jerk reaction to say that no, in fact, the state must hold at least some property for us, kind of to protect things like green lung areas in the cities and all these nice sounding things. And it's like, there is a reality to this, and this is the reality. The reality is, if the state owns it and Panyaza Lesufi has control over it, you might think that the law protects you if you put up an ad on your public property. The reality is, ultimately, he is going to come and he's going to rip it down. He's going to rip it down. You can try that with private property, of course, but it's going to be far more difficult for the Metro Police to enter a private premises and to go and take down something that they have no basis for doing. So I want to speak directly to you guys. Stop with this knee-jerk support for the commons. Like, this is a great example. We saw it earlier in the year again. A Middle East dialogue group that wanted to have a dialogue between its pro-Israeli people, pro-Palestinian people. They tried to arrange an event at Constitution Hill, which is owned by who? The Gauteng provincial government. Lesufi didn't like that idea, so he just vetoed it. The event was booked, it was going to happen, and like in the few days before it, he just said this is not happening, so it didn't happen. And then in Buffalo City, East London, a few months after that, also this year, there was a controversial preacher there who was accused of some things. I think he was ultimately acquitted. I'm sure there's something wrong there with this preacher, but still he was acquitted. He booked a venue, a municipal venue, to hold a prayer or something, and the municipality went out in public and said that, we don't like this guy, we don't like the vibes, so we're canceling the event. If you have the state, municipalities, provinces, national government owning property, it's not just a matter of, oh, okay, it's a different set of economic incentives. All your other freedoms will suffer for it. Your freedom of expression, your privacy, your freedom of association will suffer for it, because the state will treat its public property like you would treat your private property. You need to be very aware of that. Stop the knee-jerk support for the commons. But I get that there's a lot to talk about around this, about race law, about billboards, about the G20. So I think let's start with you, Ayanda. What's your take on this kerfuffle?
Yeah, thank you very much, Martin, for that introduction, really, and for coming at it from the lens of public and private property. I think I come at it from the lens of free speech, and maybe race law as well. So, of course, as you correctly note, there's context here. There was a documentary that you and I were part of, and there's a campaign that Solidarity is busy running now to raise awareness about race regulation in South Africa. And they are correct in saying that we are very much race regulated in this country. So I don't know what the frenzy is about it. But to the frenzy itself, even if you listen to some of the responses that have been leveled by people from across society, what is being said here is not that there aren't any race laws in South Africa. That has been long acknowledged, that there are race laws. What people are merely saying is that the laws we have today are somehow morally justifiable because their intentions are different. So today we're trying to empower people, we're trying to uplift them. That is really the only thing being said, and that those laws pre-94 were there to disadvantage people and to disenfranchise them and to disempower them. But the response that we make, and this is an important response because this is the liberal position on race law, and this is something which distinguishes us from those who are just critiquing the policies for their outcomes. The liberal critique is on two levels. It's a philosophical critique and it's a practical one. In practice, they have not achieved their results. But philosophically, race laws undermine a very core principle of liberalism, which is equality before the law. So it's an important distinction to make. What we're also defending here is this very principle of equality before the law, the idea that all people should enjoy equal rights, equal freedoms before the law. And race law, which privileges one group of people over the other, undermines that principle. Now, whether that was under apartheid or whether it was today, that principle remains. And if we falter on it, we can't make a claim to liberalism, because liberalism needs to be consistent in its application philosophically. If those laws philosophically were wrong pre-94, then they are wrong today. And you opposing them doesn't mean you're against the idea of empowering people. You're just saying that the law should not concern itself with things it has nothing to do with. The law is not some instrument of social engineering that you try and use to achieve certain outcomes socially. Leave the law out of that. What you need to do to try and address those issues, you need the correct policies, as we spoke earlier on about JSEC. You need those kinds of policies. And you need an economy that actually grows in South Africa. This idea that the state is going to absorb everyone and create jobs for everyone again is a fallacy. You can't do that unless you want to explode our deficit, which is already in a precarious position in this country. You need to grow the private sector as well. This idea that you're going to use BEE to try and redistribute wealth. We're in a position as a country where we're fighting over crumbs and scraps. You have people saying, keep BEE in place. And it's like, we're competing over jobs that are shrinking because the economy hasn't been growing for well over a decade. So you really need to focus on the right policies and the right approach to economic policy. And you must leave the law out of it, because once you bring the law into it, you then perpetuate injustice and you don't achieve the outcomes you want to achieve. That's the first leg of it. The second leg of it has to do with free speech. And I want to be brief here without wasting time. And the first point is, even if you want to argue that solidarity is spreading misinformation, let's say they were spreading misinformation, even then, your response should not be to silence them or to take down their billboard. Your response should be, start your own campaign, put up your own billboards and say, these guys are evil, they're spreading misinformation. Because in a free society, you counter misinformation with what you believe is the truth. You don't silence people. But the other aspect of it, which is also very important, is this idea of and I spoke to Martin about this in the office yesterday. It's this idea that there are somehow neutral arbiters out there, or people who have been endowed with these, supernatural powers, and they can somehow determine what is misinformation and what isn't misinformation. And this is a concerning thing which we've seen in recent years with platforms like Facebook, where people have been asking the question that who gets to determine what is misinformation and what isn't misinformation? Who gets to determine what is a lie and what isn't a lie in society? It's a very important question that will take us to what is the real problem here. And the real problem here is censorship. It is people who want to silence others for saying things that they do not like or things that they do not agree with. In this case, people don't agree with solidarity on race law, and they want to silence them. And then they want to position themselves as people who are neutral and say we need to have misinformation desks, whether in News 24 or whether in all these other media outlets, where it's the journalists themselves who are victims of their own prejudice and bias, who then want to determine what really should be shared with the public or not. So this is really censorship in disguise. As I said, if you believe what they're saying is wrong, counter it with what you believe is the truth, but don't silence people for expressing their views, and do away with destructive laws which are not advancing anyone in this country. Everyone is suffering. We're all losing, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicholas.
I really like how you both of things pitching it with free speech, which I think just briefly, because I think you said you really covered that very well. That's the problem with free speech. We don't do free speech because we think everyone should just be allowed to say whatever the hell they want. It's that nobody has the right to determine what is the right or wrong thing to say. No one should have all that power, to quote Kanye West, the great poet. I also really liked how you pitched around the private versus public sector property. I want to say that there's no real such thing as public property, because the government is its own entity. As I know a lot of conspiracy theorists say, oh, South Africa is a corporation and all that. Like, no, it's not a conspiracy. It is basically a corporate entity. It is an organization made up of people, and those people who are in charge are going to have their own agendas, and they're going to use the power that they now have to push their own agendas. I think the big problem with South Africa and African governments in general, and especially democracies in general, is that we come with a Western, Northern European, British model of government where we presume there to be a unbiased, competent bureaucracy. That is a fluke. Most societies have never had that. Most societies have had a very personalistic leaders who use their position selfishly to push their own agendas. It's a very, but of course, it's the British are going to think that their model applies to everyone. I say this as someone who genuinely likes the British Empire. But I think that is the main problem. I think a lot of conservatives presume that the government's going to be competent, which is very weird because everything else they presume they're going to be incompetent. But I think that this is the main problem with conservatives. It's a very temporal position that that if they're not in government, they're going to be against government. But when they're in government, they want to retain some more of that power, and that's why I find a more inconsistent viewpoint than classical liberalism, libertarianism, and all that. I also wanted to comment on the foreign affairs aspect, because I can't remember who was the first person I read this from, but it's come out a few times and I've written about it myself, that the ANC has two faces. It has its external face it shows to the world, which is still the face of Mandela. It's the rainbow nation, that we're this moderate nation that cares about our GDP growth and playing nice with international organizations, just be like it's the 2000s, late 90s, Thabo Mbeki and Mandela mode. That is what they try to show the world. And earlier this year, Trump unveiled that when Ramaphosa went to the Oval Office by showing the graves of representing all the farm murders, by showing Julius Malema singing Kill the Boer. And it showed out the internal face. The ANC shows the people in here, except for some reason, Constantia wine moms who I think only watch CNN, so they're only getting the external face. But the internal face that people who pay attention see is race regulation, resentment, and a revolutionary fervor, where a lot of white South Africans who are convinced to believe in it are effectively doing it out of an extreme sense of guilt, and also an extreme sense of apathy. But this is not normal. Internationally, this is not a normal society that we live in. And I think a part of the ANC knows this. I think they're quite aware of this. Something that really struck me was how the Secretary General said, I think it was this week or last week, he said that the ANC and him are fully aware that expropriation without compensation and land reform will destroy the economy. It will turn us into worse than Zimbabwe. It will chase away all the white people. But he says it needs to happen anyway. And that is an insane level of self-awareness when you know how terrible your policies are. And I wish that it boggles my mind that I only read this on some of the the decent websites. I like the holding group that owns Newsday and My Broadband and Business Tech, because I find that they do report on good news without being overly ideological. They also own Daily Investor, so I like that group. I can't remember who owns them, but they're the only ones to report on this. But this is proper news. It's not some conspiracy stuff being pulled out. These are legitimate news sites, much more so than News 24. This should be headline news, that one of the most powerful people in the country, one of the most powerful people in the ruling party, is saying, yeah, we know that our policies are going to cause an apocalypse, but we don't care. We want this to happen. It's worth it. That we don't care about bringing our people out of poverty. We don't care about actually righting the wrongs of the past. We just want destruction because we care about resentment and revenge. That's all it comes down to.
Yeah, and as Ayanda says in the private chat, it was Dr. James Myberg who made that two channels thesis. Very important insight there, and it's like for some reason, the ANC, specifically the ANC, has this idea that there are moments in time when the world is looking at South Africa, and then sometimes the world is no longer looking at South Africa. And like they, as I said this morning on Pretoria FM, it's like when the Americans aren't looking, then the ANC turns and whispers to South Africans, yes, there are actually race laws, but they're for good reasons. But like when the Americans are looking, it's like, no, there's no race laws in South Africa. Section 9 of the Constitution guarantees equality before the law for everyone. And it's like, listen, guys, like even when you think the Americans are focusing on Iran or kind of what's happening elsewhere in the world, the embassy is still here. Like they live here. These people live here. They
Yes.
consume the same media. Their intelligence community looks at us all the time. Like they're always looking.
Yes.
Just because Donald Trump, the man, decided that he's going to talk about this stuff doesn't mean that the world is not aware of what's happening in South Africa. So yeah, the ANC has a weird kind of I mean, I would almost want to say cartoonish conception of how geopolitics works. Like there's these moments that, oh, now we're hiding like what we're saying on national television. This is somehow a secret from what the rest of the world can see. But there's an important insight here that South Africans need to get, and we need to be asking, why is it that when the world is looking at South Africa, our government takes a completely different posture? This manifests in different ways. One is the government says, oh, it's kind of totally equality, blah, blah, blah. The other way is like the area in Joburg where the G20 kind of convoys are going to drive through is now clean. And it's very nice. It actually looks very nice, the CBD, for a change. And it's like, but why are a bunch of foreigners getting the VIP treatment, but South Africans who have to live here kind of get bent over a barrel? Like these are important questions, and a lot of people will look at this. And when I say this, I don't mean like whenever I say this, I don't mean the radicals. I don't care about the radicals and what they're saying. I'm talking about moderate centrist kind of people that more or less are kind of sensible. They will look at what I've just said and they'll say, but Martin, this is normal when there is kind of a diplomatic mission somewhere in the world. People will kind of, like in Washington, D.C., they'll put up little flags and the roads will be clear. It's like, yes, sure, but it's still clean. I was in an alleyway in Warsaw a year ago. The alleyway was clean. There was no delegates with me, no diplomats. It is a clean alleyway. I didn't see shit on the floor or vomit in the corner. Like, that is normal. That is normal. This is a society where the government respects its people. So South Africans need to just start waking up a little bit about there is a fundamental level of contempt that the South African government has for everyoneers. White people are scapegoated, immigrants are scapegoated. But make no mistake, the government hates everyone here equally, and I'm including the whole GNU shebang. Like they are all interested in gaslighting ordinary South Africans all the time. They're all interested in lying when it suits them. The DA went into the GNU saying growth and jobs and growth and jobs and growth and jobs. After the QLFS thing came out earlier this week, the DA published an infographic saying how good they're doing in the GNU, talking about some minutia, like little kind of improvements in performance. It's like, what happened to growth and jobs? Like, do not think that any politicians like you. Like they don't. They are actively against you. So yeah, that's kind of the and the solidarity banner is the greatest manifestation of this. We have to hear all the time that these transformation laws, they're not just good, they're a moral imperative. Like we will all go to hell if we don't have these transformation laws. But when the G20 is in town, it's like we have to hide that we have these laws. So no, it's a completely ridiculous state of affairs. I am glad, and when people ask me, they're like, "Oh, geez, we're so sorry about this thing that's happening with Trump." I'm like, "No, this is good. This is very good for South Africa. This is the kind of facade has been ripped off. And yes, Donald Trump is only going to be in office for a few more years, but this timely intervention, I think, has changed the dynamic completely because it has allowed South African civil society to actually start, I mean, to not beat around the bush anymore. The criticism of BEE, the criticism of a lot of these things are now a lot more common, not just from conservatives and from the right, but really all over the show. People are feeling a little bit more comfortable calling out truth as it happens in reality. So in general, I think good thing. The diplomatic chaos is a good thing. because finally we're a step closer to pure ANC without the theatrics. We can see what these people actually think of us. Yeah, so we're on an hour, guys. I'm going to give you both a last word, and then I will close it up. So let's start with you, Ayanda.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Martin. I think on both topics we discussed today with JSEC and Zakes' paper and then race law, I think our country is at crossroads. We're in a very, very precarious position as a country in so many ways. On one hand, you have a government that is hell-bent on keeping policies in place that honestly have damaged this country, have damaged the economy, and have not allowed people, really young people in particular, to progress. And on the other hand, the same government now refuses to be held accountable. It wants to suppress free speech in the name of protecting democracy and in the name of fighting misinformation. You also touched on the DA now, which seems to be focused more on admin, whether it's home affairs or education or wherever. And what it appears to me is being forgotten are the kinds of things that made them join the GNU in the first place, which are the serious policy reforms that we need. We need serious policy reforms in South Africa. And part of what Solidarity is doing is to try and really force this government to make concessions. That's the approach we need to adopt. This government needs to be forced to make concessions. If people raise accusations of undermining sovereignty, then so be it. You have backed us into a corner as the people of this country. We must now back you into really a corner as well, which is why even I'm not a fan of Cape independence and other movements which favor, separating the country. But I understand why it's important to take such an extreme position, is to try and force this government to make concessions. They could well be pushing for decentralization, but sometimes you have to adopt these kinds of positions to force the government to make concessions. So really, I think going ahead into future, this is the kind of approach we need to adopt of Solidarity. You need to back them into a corner. You need to engage Europe, engage its diplomats, go to embassies, speak to them as well, get Europe on your side as well in terms of this race law debate. It's a good thing. The cover has been blown off, and that's a very good thing. But now the aim must be to also spread the message across the world and to get this government to make concessions. Because if you're going to rely on all these political arrangements, you're going to have a problem. The ANC will be a part of coalitions for the foreseeable future. They won't be processed out as quickly as people think they will be. So there needs to be another strategy to force the government to make concessions.
Absolutely. Well said. Nicholas.
I think you both summed it up very well. I think that the crux of the matter is that the ANC and this government doesn't actually care about South Africans. In some ways, some foreign governments care more about normal South Africans than our own government does. And I think that we need to proceed with that. The DA especially needs to stop thinking that the ANC can be bargained with or reasoned with. Maybe there's some reasonable people within the organization, but I think the entire organization is a rot. It's too deep set into that. And I used to think that there were other solutions to this, but I think that at the end of the day, the only way that there's going to be any progress in this country is if the ANC is ushered out of power. And you're right, Ayanda, it's not going to be overnight. It's going to be every election, a smaller percentage, hopefully. They're very good at spin doctoring their way into winning more votes and surviving. How they keep tricking people every 5 years into thinking that if they don't win, the apartheid's going to magically appear again. But I think that just shows how urgent things are and how little respect we should be giving the ANC going forward.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a good point from both of you, because look, the ANC is going to be around for a while still as the biggest party, not the majority party, but as the biggest party. And I don't think anyone denies that. What I think where the disconnect comes in between, for instance, what we say and what the DA says, we're not saying you have to ignore the ANC or not to go into a coalition with them even. We're saying that when you do those things, you have to do it with your eyes open. Like, yes, maybe there was a compelling reason why the National Conservatives went into a coalition of the Nazis in the 1930s. They had a calculation that they had to make to keep the communists out, but they went in it with their eyes closed. They went in it with a completely naive conception of how you can control Adolf Hitler. Like, they thought, they had these delusions that they just have to bring Hitler into power and then they can control him. Well, it kind of didn't work out that way. And I think a lot of people at the time told them that, especially from the Jewish community, which was influential in Germany, said, you do not do this, you don't understand what you're doing. We have been telling the DA, we've been telling the Freedom Front, the IFB, sure, fine. We said don't go into a coalition. But okay, you've now gone into a coalition. You have to be aware that you're not dealing with colleagues. Like, these people are not your friends. And unfortunately, some DA people have in op-eds written about how they are forming bonds with these people, with these ANC cadres, forming close collegial bonds. And I mean, sure, that's inevitable if you're in close proximity to someone, but you had to go into it with a far more fortified kind of mentality against that type of thing. Like, don't say good morning, minister. Spit in his coffee. That's the kind of treatment that you have to give these people. Yes, yeah, you're in a coalition. You need to say, fuck you, minister, every morning. I hate being here with you, but we have to be here because that's how the electoral arithmetic worked out. Don't form bonds with these people. Don't form friendships with these people. Do not go into the Oval Office. My goodness, a once in a 2-3 generation opportunity. You walk into the Oval Office and you proceed to blow sunshine up Cyril Ramaphosa's ass. Seriously, no. You should have told the world in the Oval Office, as the Minister of Agriculture, John Steenhuisen, you should have said that man sitting there pointing at Cyril Ramaphosa is a disgrace. That is the worst president that this country has had in years. Yes, I have to work with him. I don't have a choice. We've been forced into this arrangement, but that guy is pathetic. You don't owe him the time of day. I despise that man. That's what you should have said, John Steenhuisen. That was your opportunity. You should have told the truth. You should have said that we have huge problems in this country that are just the result of the ANC. Forget about the EFF, forget about the MK. These are crises that the ANC has foisted upon South Africa's wealthiest, most advanced, sophisticated society, and it's bringing it down. That's what you should have said, John Steenhuisen.
You should clip that and send it to him.
Yes, well, I'm sure that the DA by now knows kind of what differences we have about their approach to this issue. So I mean, yes, it's a complete problem about we're just talking about the mentality here. We're just talking about a mentality, the mentality with which these parties have entered into the GNU, and it has caused untold additional damage to this country now, specifically in the view of the international community. Like, why do we not have a non-ANC minister of foreign affairs? Yes, they're going to say, well, the ANC wasn't prepared to give it up. Who asked them? It's not up to them. They lost the election. You should have bargained. You should have negotiated. You should have fought tooth and nail. You should have said that if we don't get DIRCO, we will sink this whole ship. We will force you to go with the EFF, and that's going to be a lot of fun for the ANC, I'm sure. But that should have been the kind of bargaining that should have been going on. But no. Kind of, we don't want to rock the boat. Want to get along, go along to get along is the name of the game. I'm sure some of you notice that this frustrates me a little bit, but yes, I think that that's a good note to end this on. That we've now seen that the unemployment crisis in South Africa has not abated. The small decimal point change, I mean, it's welcome if it's reflective of reality that more people are working. That is a very good thing. But the kind of the back of employment in South Africa is still very much broken, and that's not going to be solved unless the GNU get serious, and unless we as civil society compel the GNU to get serious about jobs. And secondly, race law is a stain. It is a complete stain on this country's name. The world, we went into a bargain with the world in the 1990s, and we solemnly swore that we were done. South Africa was the international avatar of racialized legislation, and the world expended a lot of money and time and effort in helping the liberation movement undo that. And we swore an oath, really, that we were done. It's right there in section 1B of the Constitution. It's right there in black and white. It says that South Africa is a non-racial society, and we've broken that oath. So we owe the world, we certainly owe our own citizens and our own people getting off the race law bandwagon now, finally, after many years. Because if you do those two things, Nicholas, I think you said this at the top. These two things, unemployment and race law, like if you can solve those two things, actually South Africa is in a far better position than we were going in. There's many other things, property rights, etc. But if you can get those two things solved, and they're relatively easy to solve, JSEC, IRR's no more race laws bill, you can do these things in a week and problem solved. But yeah, if you can do those two things, then we'll be in a much better position. But that is it from us. My little rant against the DA over. I will need to go and take a break after that. But yeah, we encourage you to please like and share this video. Please restack it on Substack. Rational Standard is primarily a Substack publication, so please go and read our articles at rationalstandard.com. Please also visit the Free Market Foundation's website, where you will find the JSEC paper that was published earlier this week. Its title is Diffusing the Joblessness Time Bomb by Zakele Mthembu. Please read that. It's quite a short piece. I'm sure you'll find a lot of insight from that. And we will be back again next week, Friday, same time, same place. And I'm sure we'll have a lot more to say about the G20 then. All right, everyone, have a good weekend. Cheerio.